Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Good Night, everybody. I am your host, Chris Lawrence. Tonight, my guests, I'm very pleased to have for my guests, my two friends, Trevor Alcorn of Tridentine Brewing, Chris Lewis, Baritus Catholic Illustration, to talk about their eternal, seems like, collaboration on Tridentine Brew and the new commercial launch of Tridentine Brewing. Guys, thanks so much for coming on and talking about this.
My pleasure to be back.
Yeah.
So, Trevor, let me start with you because it started with you. How did Tridentine, for those who don't know, for any new watchers, how did Tridentine begin? What's the origins of the brewery in the first place?
Yeah, so Tridentine was really something that went way back with my family. It's something that my father really started doing with my grandfather as a hobby, and he did that for many years. And then when my grandfather passed away, the hobby died out for my father because I was pretty young. But when we were clearing out about 10 years ago, 12 years ago now, my parents were moving. We were clearing out the basement, found a bunch of home brewing equipment. I asked my dad, what's all this stuff? He's like, oh, yeah, it's the home brewing equipment that I used to brew with grandpa. And I was like, all right, let's do it. Let's start doing a batch. And so we did. We did about 3 or 4 times a year with extract brewing, which is the entry level for home brewing. And it was fun to do every now and then. We didn't really have much time to do it until my father retired from his full-time job in 2019. And then we decided, okay, let's take this to the next level. And so we upgraded our brewing equipment, went to all grain brewing. And then we also upgraded, I guess, the branding of it, because up to that point we had done some naming of beers, but we didn't really have anything uniform. We didn't have a name for what we were doing. So I thought, all right, let's name it. Came up with about 30 different names for it. I'm glad that some of them definitely didn't win out.
What were some of them? What were your least favorite ones?
Yeah, my dad had one that was called Barking Weasel, which sounds hilarious, but I was like, yeah, let's not do that. Let's make it more meaningful. So
what's the story behind that? Where does that even come from? There's got to be an inside story or an inside joke. I'm not letting you get off the hook that easy.
Oh man, yeah, Chris. Well, on that one, that would actually be good to ask him, because I totally forgot what the inside scoop was on the Barking Weasel.
We're gonna have to find out for next time. We got to know.
Well, yeah, if you have him on ever, you can ask him.
Oh, that would be great. Would he do it? Would he come on the show?
Maybe. I don't know. He typically leaves all the social media stuff and podcast stuff to me. He's like, Trevor, I don't feel like, he's like, you're the face of everything, which I don't know how I feel about that, but here I am. So yeah, but anyway, we had the 30 names, and one of the names, there was actually a few Catholic names, and I put in Tridentine. We all kind of as a family decided to just, let's name it Tridentine. And again, this isn't a commercial or anything. This is just something as a family hobby. Yeah. And I just wanted to make it more, and of course my father as well, he bought into the idea of just having it more themed, having it more Catholic. Maybe this is a way that we can express our Catholic faith more through beer. And just giving it to family and friends, because that's all we've been doing up to this point until we're commercial. We haven't been selling it. So we did that, and then we really just kept on going with it from there. So it just kept on like growing and growing. The naming of it, we got my brother Cameron involved in a lot of the graphic design, and he helped design a lot of our homebrew labels. And then eventually, of course, I had been a great admirer of Chris Lewis's work, who's on the call here with us. And I thought, wow, if we could get some of Chris's artwork on some of these beer labels, that would be amazing. So we reached out to Chris, and Chris was very gracious. I kind of took a chance, this guy reaching out to him about homebrew labels, hey, could I maybe use some of your artwork? We use some of your artwork, and Chris was very gracious and, allowed us to use some of his artwork for some of our homebrew labels. And, one grew into like 4 or 5 different brews with Chris's artwork. And so anyway, yeah, it just got to the point where my father, who never really wanted to do this as a commercial venture, he always viewed it as a homebrew hobby, finally decided a year and a half ago, hey, let's try and see what we can't do, because there had been so much interest generated through social media and other people. So, hey, let's give it a shot. And so it's been quite the interesting journey along the way. I know that for a lot of people out there that have just been following our journey for a few years online, it may even be a bit frustrating because it's like a snail's pace almost.
Well, a lot goes into it. I'm sure we're going to hear about too. So I think people just probably feel vindicated that they stuck around and followed you for all this time, and now they may actually get to taste some of the beers that they had to kind of take on faith that they existed, right? Fittingly enough.
That's right.
Chris, when this wild beer man first reached out to you, what were you thinking when you were approached by Trevor? I'm assuming it was through email or the company then known as Twitter. Were you familiar? Had you because Trevor's been a pretty big deal on the Twitter for a while now, for his savviness with the social media. Were you aware of who he was at all when you reached out, or no?
No, that's the crazy thing. I don't even think that I was really on Twitter at that point. I mean, this was pretty early in me even having like Baritus. And I remember when Trevor approached me, it was probably through Instagram, because that's where I was most active in those days. Yeah. And probably still, that's probably my main place. And I think he reached out to me there. And that must have been, Trevor, I don't know, you can remind me, like 2019. I mean, it was early, maybe 2020 at the latest, but I had just started my company in 2018. I knew it wasn't that long after that. And it's funny that they were doing this as a hobby. I didn't learn this until just one of our calls more recently, that, you know, we kind of started our companies about the same time. And because I thought he was like a really well-established like brewer. You know, they came out of the gate strong. I didn't realize his brother was a graphic designer, so he had hooked them up with some really nice looking labels, and it had a nice traditional sort of like old Americana beer feel type presentation to it. And so I was like, oh, these guys have just been around, like this must be something they've been doing in their family, like professionally forever. And so I was a little intimidated. I was like, they reached out to me. I mean, I was honored, of course, that they would want to use my artwork in this way, because I'm a huge beer lover. So that was a huge plus right there for me. And then to know they're a Catholic, and then, you know, after getting to meet Trevor and his father, you know, they're just such great guys. And no, it's been a blast. We've had fun. Even in the days where it was more of just using existing work, you know, I always wanted to make sure that it worked well for their packaging. So, for example, like Cristeros, I think I don't know if I know I have your tin tackers here somewhere. I'm redoing this room here, so it's a mess. But I think I had this idea for a Cristeros image, Trevor, and I think when you reached out to me, that was like the fire under me to like get that going, if I remember right. So
that was.
Yeah,
it's like miraculous timing, because when I reached out about the first Cristeros for the homebrew version, you're like, well, I was thinking of a Cristeros. Actually, it was like the next one in the docket. So that was really fun to kind of work through that process, or you go through that process and us see like your creative genius along the way, Chris, as you develop that image.
Now, Trevor, I'm assuming Chris was your first choice to do the artwork. Was there a backup plan? Because what would you have done if you reached out to Chris and said, hey, can you design some artwork for my beer company? And he said, well, you know, let me check with my sponsor at AA, and I'll get back to you. If something like that had occurred, what would have been plan B?
Well, it wouldn't have been me creating it. It would have been me. It definitely, you know, it definitely would have been AI. I know that sometimes I put like AI images out there for fun. I just dabble in that. It probably drives Chris crazy when he sees it on his timeline. But it would have been a struggle, because I think that, you know, there definitely is a lot of Catholic artists out there. Sure. And I'm sure that, you know, we could have worked with other Catholic artists, but at the same time, you know, I thought Chris's artwork was just so well adapted, like just so classically beautiful yet modern at the same time. It really lended itself really well to like a beer can format. And so that's why initially when I saw Chris's artwork, I was like, oh man, we have to work with Chris. I got to get Chris to do the artwork for the can, because it'll just look amazing. and like a really nice cohesive branding, because a lot of Catholic artists they're also not all like graphic designers. They might do paintings or other things. And I was like, okay, that just makes it more difficult to put it, very cohesive from a brand standpoint. So long story short, it could have been done, but I don't think it would have been nearly as beautiful as what we've been able to come up with Chris's help.
Right. It really syncs up his work and your, and that's difficult, right? Because you never know if you're gonna, things that are aesthetic in nature, things that are creative in nature. A lot of times people end up clashing more than they are on the same page. So it's something providential, perhaps, that you and Chris synced up so well about the issues. Has there been any? I should ask then. Has there been any butting of heads? Has there been a time where Chris presented a design ahead to you and you said, we need to go a different way, or vice versa? Trevor, has there been a time where you've suggested something to Chris and he said, I don't really want to, that's not something I can do?
Well, I'll let Chris answer too, but what I can say is what's been great about working with Chris the entire time is like, you give Chris a concept, even high level concept. This is what I'm looking for. And then like Chris hits out of the ballpark every single time. I've never had to go back and be like, oh wow, like this wasn't what I was thinking at all. This doesn't make any sense. I think we need to scrap this part of that. That's actually never been the case. I mean, maybe Chris could correct me. Now I will say, just like internally with ourselves, like me and my father, like there's been like little things, even on the Cristeros can that we've had differing visions of.
Is that this new the original?
No, the commercial can. But I mean, they're in the grand scheme of things, they're just little things. But we've had some spirited discussions on that. And but in regards to Chris, no, I've actually, not that I can remember. It's actually, Chris is great to work with. I'm not just saying that because we're on a podcast. So yeah, I've never had any trouble. I actually, like, whenever Chris shows it the first time, usually his drafts look like they're the real deal, like they're done too. Like, yeah. He's like, oh, I just sketched this out. You're like, you just sketch this out. Like, it could be ready for showtime. It looks phenomenal. So yeah, that also is just blowing me away too, seeing like sketches. Because when I sketch, it's like, oh man, this is pretty bad. Like when Chris sketches, it's like, wow, this is like the final product. It's ready to roll.
And what about on your end, Chris? Has there been anything that you found difficult, either a request for a design or something that Trevor put forth that you thought, boy, I don't know if I can really capture what he wants, or I don't know if I'm on board with that, or I don't know if I get it? No,
I mean, honestly, since you guys even, connected with me, one of the big things for me that I was like, okay, these guys are like the real deal as far as like brewing, and they're in the Catholic world and all of that is, and just your professionalism really, when you approached me, I knew that, okay, this is somebody that would be a fun partner to work with on one of these collabs. And again, I love beer, so it was kind of an exciting thing for me to jump into, because I hadn't done anything even close to like this in the Catholic world since starting Baritus. I used to work a lot in the secular retail world, like launching private label brands, and we did some. I think Trevor and I even talked about this early on, that I did some like energy drinks and stuff for people, but nothing to this degree. And even from the beginning, like all the concepts, like it just melded. We melded very well together because they had all the same kind of sensibilities that I typically have. I was looking at even the stuff that his brother did that was just nicely ornamented. You can tell he like took his time trying to tap into some of that historical legacy of the beer brewing, tradition, and a lot of those little fine-tuned things that like the average person might kind of like gloss over, but people that are like heavy into the beer culture would kind of pick up. He captured a lot of that on the labels. So when it came time to just incorporating some of my work in the beginning, I could tell that they already had a strong foundation. Like it was going to work really well because his brother, I don't know if he wants to be named on here. So,
you could name him.
Okay. Yeah. So Cameron, right?
Yep. It's Cameron.
Okay. I got confused for a minute. I was thinking Cameron, Master of the Ages, but yeah, Cameron, he already had a good foundation there. So it was really easy to work my work into his. I did have a concern, like in the beginning, sometimes when people license artwork, they're initially like attracted to like this image behind me that actually Tridentine did use of Stella Maris. Sometimes people will be very attracted to that image, but it might not work really well when you try to implement it into an existing packaging, right? So, I mean, that was one of my early concerns, but that never ended up being anything we butted heads over, and it wasn't even something that didn't work. It actually worked really well once you put it into the template. And from there, like, no, this is a really good fit, and even better. So, I mean, I think early on I was like really eager to I would love to just go all out and blow out a completely new design for you guys. And I think I might have mentioned that early on at some point, and you guys were like, well, maybe one day when we go commercial or something like that. But so we, now that we're here, it was kind of going back and looking at how to bring all of that stuff together, but in a way where we could really take it from just basic, almost from whiteboard, starting from scratch. How do we build it up? But not necessarily starting from scratch, because of course in branding and things, you want to keep all of those core details that are important to Tridentine there. So no, I don't think we butted heads. I think it's worked really well. And yeah, I mean, that's not going to get you. That's probably not as exciting for your interview here.
No, but I'm happy to
versus us fighting out our story. But,
well, Chris, next time I ask you something like that, just make something up.
Yeah,
we gotta get the views.
Yeah.
So
we'll make it really
let me add this, and I know we're not going to get into the can. I mean, this is grown on me. Chris knows exactly what I'm going to bring up, I think. So we have our Cristeros can. And my father, he loves a story of Miguel Pro, and you can see Miguel Pro right there. There's a silhouette of Miguel Pro, and my father wanted Miguel Pro on the can, and I fought really hard against it. I think we even had a spirited discussion on the call with Chris about the inclusion of Miguel Pro, and so yeah, no, it actually turned out great. It's really grown on me. So, if my father's listening, don't let him know, but I think he was right about the silhouette of Miguel Pro on the can.
Were you afraid, was your fear that this would be kind of off-putting to non-Catholics, a little bit of a morbid feel to the can? What was your concern, if you don't mind telling us? Is it kind of that? My sense would be that would be what you might worry about commercially, right?
Yeah, I thought initially maybe people wouldn't know the story, or we didn't have enough of a backstory on who, because it wasn't a Miguel Pro can necessarily. So that was just my initial concern. But yeah, I think, like I was saying, over time it's really grown on me, and yeah, I think Miguel Pro's story does blend well with, obviously, the whole Cristero story. He died during the war, even though he himself wasn't a Cristero. He died as a part of the conflict, and so I think it's important to shine a light on his story as well. And so, yeah,
I think I remember that coming up, that he wasn't a Cristero, and this is one of those rare occasions where I was almost. I love the way that little, it's just a little, if you look at it, it's a very textured can. It's got a whole scene going on behind it, but then as you turn it, it's just a little detail in the corner. But Catholics who know about the Cristeros and that whole period of history are just familiar with just that image. It's just really a strong image, and it's actually turned out to be one of my favorite things about this can, Trevor. Because it's kind of just like this little detail there that it just helps flesh out the story so much more. I'm glad we went with it.
Yeah, I think it looks great.
Trevor, do you think about, or I don't want to say worry about, but is it a concern of yours? Is it an aspect of the brewery to appeal to non-Catholics? Is that something you even thought about? And if you did think about that, how hard is it to kind of strike a balance between just a beer for Catholics and a beer for everyone that has Catholic imagery? Because that's probably a difficult thing to do if you're gonna aim for that, right?
It can be. I mean, I think it just needs to be thoughtful when you're planning out the can, right? So sure. We don't want to shy away, and we never had the intention of shying away from Catholic imagery, or even if it's explicitly Catholic. That said, at the same time, I don't mind if it's also just things that are Catholic hiding in plain sight, almost, not as a way to hide the faith, but not everything needs to be like an enormous cross in the middle of every single scene or something like that to drive home the fact that it's Catholic. So,
Right.
for example, I mean, there's just so many on the Cristero can. Our Lady of Guadalupe. The fact that the Cristero, actually, he has a rosary on his belt. Miguel Pro in the corner. So there's a lot of aspects that are clearly Catholic in this, but don't like scream. I don't think that we even mention, even on the side of the can, we have a little story, and we tell the story of the Cristeros and why we brewed the beer. And I don't think you even say explicitly Catholic. But again, that wasn't to hide the faith. It was just that we didn't feel like it needed to be like screamed out there necessarily. Now, at the same time, we're fine. Or I found, even talking with non-Catholics, that they're really drawn to Cristero can, just because the artwork is just so phenomenal on it. To where they look at it, they're like, whoa, it's amazing. Look at this, like the whole scenery. Even though most non-Catholics I've talked to, they don't know who the Cristeros are, but they're like, wow, that's a pretty cool cowboy on there. It looks awesome. So that really hasn't been too much of an issue that we've ever really discovered up to this point, that if someone's non-Catholic and they like scoff at it, they're like, oh, what's that? Like, oh, it's a little too Catholic for me. Like that's never come up. So I'm glad of kind of the balance that we have on the can, in that it's attractive to non-Catholics. They'll pick it up. There's nothing on there that's like screams Catholic for someone who maybe isn't so friendly to the church that they wouldn't pick up the can. So it's a good way to have an entry for that person into the Tridentine landscape, and even into the story that we're trying to convey in a way that, again, probably wouldn't be accessible to them otherwise, because they probably would never know otherwise about the story.
I find this, I'm interested in this because, someone said to me on one of the former episodes of this show, he said, like, oh, why doesn't the show have a Catholic name? I said, well, it's not a Catholic show. It's a talk show whose host happens to be Catholic. So Catholic things may come up. Some of my guests are going to be Catholic, but the show is for everybody. But it's hard to find that balance. I feel like, one side or the other, if we're going to use the word sides, wants to pigeonhole you, But like the best way I can think to explain it is like Kevin James is a very devout Catholic, but nobody's going to describe Paul Blart Mall Cop as a Catholic movie, right? It's a comedy that's for everybody. It's not going to offend you if you are a Catholic, but it's like anybody can go and give them money and they'll probably laugh at the movie. Well, that's kind of like with this. It's like I'm not going to deny being Catholic because I'm going to get the lightning bolt. But at the same time, this isn't like a theology show. It's a talk show. Some of my guests are going to be Catholic. We're going to bring up Catholic things. So that balance really interests me. And I think that probably initially people will be drawn to and have been drawn to Chris's art. And they don't need to know necessarily off the bat the story behind what that art represents, but it might draw curiosity out of them that they then go and look into these things. And I'm assuming, Chris, you especially, that when you're thinking about creating something for a commercial beer launch, that's kind of the intention, right? Like, I want to draw people in with my art. I want to make them curious about what this is. They can leave it there. That's fine. But maybe they'll dive a little bit deeper into what this image is representing. Is that a conscious part of your thought process when you're creating these images?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think, just to go back to the idea of whether it's like just advertently Catholic is, if it's just everything's just on the face, you risk kind of like overwhelming the point. And what you really want to do is draw people in and make them interested in by putting a little bit of a focus on certain aspects of it and then kind of fleshing it out with the other aspects. But it should all be working together in unity to tell some kind of story. That's another part of the fact that why I've been so impressed working with Tridentine is because they're so good about like what they want, what stories they want to communicate. And so working with them on these projects has been super easy because they have a really clear vision for like what they want each story for each can to be. And it's just a matter of me diving into that story and thinking, okay, well, how do I bring that story to life? And so whether it's, the Cristeros, where you have the Cristero fighter as the central image. That's what's initially going to attract people. And then all the other details, like, okay, well, what is that flag? Non-Catholics might not know what that flag is. Why is there, a rider in the background with the woman, holding the ammunition belt, and why is she waving at him? And, all these different little tidbits to start to flesh out the rest of the can. Those are the things that people can enjoy kind of digging into as you're sitting there and enjoying this amazing beer. And so you want them to kind of like rest in that story for a little bit. If you just try and communicate everything just like right on the nose, then it risks, it risks too much of being inauthentic or just a marketing ploy. And I think, speaking as far as us being in the Catholic world, this is one of the things we say about Catholic content a lot as far as creators, is that we need to create more deep, like profound content that's really telling the Catholic story. But we don't have to say all the Catholic things. Like even my company name, Baritus, people don't, it's not a Catholic word. But it has a Catholic meaning if you dig into what, it could represent. And, we see like when there's been a lot of Protestant productions out there for Christian themes, they tend to do that, where it's like just all kind of like in your face and on the surface. And then you kind of, you kind of lose the story and you don't really connect with it. And it becomes just like you're being sold a good, some kind of good. And that wasn't the point here. And I'm sure if Trevor would probably agree, like the story here, the art is serving the story behind it. And so I try to stay, let that be my focus and kind of my guardrail for the project.
Right. Because it's artless otherwise. Like a lot of those movies are that are putting the message first. They don't think about the art that they should be using to convey the message. That's so they end up being all preach and no entertainment. And we've seen that so much from, and it's funny because this is maybe a bit of a non sequitur, but we're kind of seeing the opposite of that in Hollywood now. They're trying to preach so much of an amoral almost message that a lot of the artistry and filmmaking has been lost out there too. Chris, I have another question for you about the creative process. I knew you did commercial work before you started Baritus, so maybe this wasn't as much of an issue for you, but being that you had been used to for a while now with Baritus, whatever size, whatever medium, whatever format, it was all your call. How did you find having to design for specific shapes and sizes, so beer cans, beer bottles? I would imagine, knowing you a little bit, how creative you are, I think the analogy I would use is, we had the Hays Code in the 40s and 50s, and speaking of Hollywood, in Hollywood, which restricted a lot of what could be shown on screen. And some filmmakers considered this, being boxed in, right? They didn't want to work that way, and so they wouldn't create movies that could be portrayed in Hollywood. But at the same time, there are those who found it freeing in a way because it forced them to be more creative. They had to deal with these stipulations. They had to work within these frameworks. And consequently, I would say some of the greatest movies, Citizen Kane was made under the code, for example. So there were guys who flourished within these limits. Do you find the limits of having to design for specific templates to be a challenge you relish and rise to, or can it be a bit cumbersome in a way, not being able to just use whatever format you would like to, as you do with much of your other work?
Yeah, that's interesting. So the Citizen Kane thing, I didn't realize that, and to me it makes sense. Like I actually like the guardrails. I like a little bit of here's your limit. It's more of a challenge. So like, here's your limitation. Here are the things we want to convey. Like, working on beer cans, especially with as much as there is to be said about the Cristeros and the history there, we had to really be selective about we can't tell the whole story, but we can only put some of the critical things in there that would kind of convey the picture. And so there was guardrails to that. And there's also guardrails in the sense that, we are working in this very limited amount of space. And so, one of the technical things there, just as far as how that was assembled was, I created each of the elements separately so we could adjust that as we needed to. And then as far as just the content, we were very selective about, okay, what are those key elements? Like, for example, Jeff, Trevor's father, I can remember him being very adamant about having these roses in there because it helped tell some of the story of the Cristeros. And I remember us having that discussion about bringing the woman in because of the part that the women played to kind of help the Cristeros receive their all the supplies and things to carry out their war. And so like there were these very critical key elements that like we weren't going to, there's no way for me to express that entire story, but we could put those elements in there so you at least get a hint of it, and you can it raises the question. But so yeah, I actually like the limitations. I find it a bit of a challenge, and it's actually, you know, some of the personal work that I do, you know, there are no guardrails to that, and I can run free with it, and that's fun because I'm all up in my head with it. But when a client comes to me and they say, okay, here's something we want to do, and you know, you got this, and this, the goals we got to hit, and here are your limitations. Like, I love it. For me, that's a little bit of a challenge, and that's kind of where for these types of projects is where I thrive, because then you got to really hit the cutting room floor and decide, okay, what do I keep in? What do I cut out? How do I maximize the full effect of like the impact of looking at this can for the first time? What is going to be the thing that draws you in? These are all the decisions that play a part in that. And that's kind of the fun part of just being a designer and a creative in this capacity.
Right. That's great. Yeah. Trevor, I have to take a step back, maybe way back, because unless I'm mistaken, I think I remember you telling me that back in your family somewhere, there was a bootlegger. And so beer, and I don't know if they were brewing, but beer and the distribution of alcohol goes back farther than your father, doesn't it? And is that a story that you know much about that you can tell? Because that's fascinating. That whole era is, well, I mean, HBO made a whole show about it. So it's a very interesting part of our history in this country. Do you know much about who that person was and what they were involved in? I mean, Trevor, let me tell you, the statute of limitations, it's run out. So you don't have to worry about that part. But what do you know about that?
Yeah, so what I can say, it's actually my great grandmother who she actually immigrated to the U.S. from Poland. She, you know, came over from Poland to Chicago, and she brewed beer in her bathtub at her Chicago residence during Prohibition. So she wasn't running the distribution. She wasn't running anything for Al Capone or anything, but she was brewing, you know, for herself and the family in the bathtub. And again, I don't know how much I would have liked to drink bathtub beer that had been fermented, but you know, I guess you have to do what you have to do, and there's a short supply. So she was the first one, and so she was my grandmother's grandmother. Mm-hmm. And it was my grandmother and grandfather, maternal grandmother and grandfather, that taught my father how to brew. And so that's kind of the connection there. So yeah, definitely a line, or at least some family history with the brewing before it even got to my father and myself.
Right. No,
are you saying that bathtub beer is not going to be one of the commercial releases?
Chris, good luck with that. Speaking of getting boxed in for a design.
Right. I guarantee you guys that somewhere in Portland, Oregon, somebody's brewing bathtub brand beer right now. And it's probably already out there. I bet if you look up online, there's probably bathtub beer. I've seen all kinds of stuff.
I've seen some weird brews.
I've seen some stuff.
Not that one yet. So you could, you know, come out of the gates with that one being a
you might want to
trailblazer.
Ahead of that. You want to get ahead of that, Trevor. It's not a bad idea. But so I don't know if you said, maybe you've told me this before, maybe you said on this very show, but when your father was doing it before you got involved, was it ever a job for him, or was it pure hobby for him always also? Did he ever work as a brewmaster for anyone or anywhere?
No, he didn't ever work as a brewmaster, but my father, he had been involved in his prior career. He was in life sciences, so pharmaceuticals, so in manufacturing and in quality. So he definitely had a lot of the science aspect of it nailed down pretty well, but it was always really for him until we just launched commercially. It'd always been a hobby for him. It was never a career.
This sounds like a Walter White story almost, where he's the chemist, and now
you know what? It's really funny because he is in a certain very real sense, and then with the brewery that we've partnered with to brew our commercial beer, in Milwaukee, Carbon 4. There's some real talented people there who, really remind me of one individual in particular reminds me of Walter White. He's a genius, and it's been really great to work with them because you just learn so much, and the process is really so fascinating. So that's been a blessing being able to work with them. But yeah, my father, he's very talented as well with being able to break it down, understand the process, and much so more than I have.
Well, I don't want to hear any Jesse Pinkman type behavior from you, Trevor. You better not be running around calling your father the B word.
That's right.
You will not be invited back on the show. But what is the process of brewing like? How long? I mean, I'm sure you can't get into it in great detail, being that we're restricted on time a little bit here. But about how long does it take from the inception of the idea of I want to make a beer? So you're sitting there, I want to make a beer, to being able to brew your first bottle or however it comes out of the beer. And does that process change much, become more efficient now that you're going commercial? I would imagine so.
Yeah. So, and I'll just talk for a second, just from a purely a homebrew aspect, and it's different from commercial standpoint. But from a homebrew standpoint, I mean, really, you could, from inception of an idea, and here I'm not talking about making a label or anything else like that. I'm just strictly talking about having an idea for a particular beer and then being able to, from inception to drinking it, it can be really anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks to, 8 weeks plus. It really just depends on the style. So some beers are just very fast fermenting. And so depending on the style, you could have a beer that's ready to be bottled from the time that you brew it to the time it's ready to be bottled. It could be, a week or two. So that's really the main factor there. But typically it does take a lot longer than, let's just say 3 to 8 weeks, because if you have an idea for a brew, you typically are going to investigate the recipe. So if you're really into home brewing, you're going to want to put your mark on it. So for example, if you wanted to brew an Irish stout, there are lots of recipes out there. You could just take someone else's recipe. Usually the brewing community is very good about sharing their recipes. Or a lot of brewers will share their recipes. And so you can take something like that, or you could do more investigation yourself and tweak it. And so there's some investigation there to make your own recipe, and then you have to get all the ingredients. So either order it online or go to a homebrew shop and get all the ingredients, the entire grain bill, the yeast that you need, etc. And so that's just up until the point that you have brew day. And then from brew day, of course, there's brew day, then there's fermentation time, and then there's bottling and conditioning time after that. So that's where the bulk of the time is, at 3 to 8 weeks plus. Lagers can take longer, by the way. Lagers can take months to, depending on how you do the process, it can easily take months. But there are plenty of ales that are, just a few weeks that you could have it finished.
How often do things go wrong? Do things go wrong? Has there been instances where you start a brew and you get a certain amount of the way through, and for whatever reason, we got to kill this one, and it goes down the toilet, and you start again? Does that happen? How often does that happen?
Hey, Chris, it's always been perfect. God has blessed our brews at Tridentine.
Oh.
No, it's it really does. Especially as you're learning, things go wrong,
Sure.
and it can be one of the more humbling, frustrating processes that you go through, because sometimes, most of the time actually, you don't find out what you did wrong until a month, 2 months after brew day. And then you have to do a deep dive and find out, well, what was the root cause of that? Did I do this process right? Did I do that? Did I not sanitize this one part? Was the temperature at this one step too high, et cetera? And so it takes a lot of digging to try and find out, okay, there's this off taste in the beer. Let's figure it out. I mean, each off taste in a beer, and there could be, hundreds of different off tastes. could indicate a certain problem in the process that went wrong. So that's where it takes a lot of time and effort and investigation, and it can be frustrating, and obviously it can be disheartening, because if you put all that time and effort in, I mean, just brew day itself can easily be a 12 plus hour ordeal. Put aside any of the cost associated with it, just the time involved in it. And so that can be disheartening, but if you stick with it, obviously you can continue to perfect it. But, just from a homebrew perspective, things even for us, will still come up in our learning experiences along the way. And, again, it's never fun, but, makes you a better brewer.
And Chris, what about you? How are you working with a deadline with a lot of these designs you're doing for Trevor? Are you kind of given free reign to take as long as you want, and you're kind of it's done when it's done kind of guy? And how often do you scrap a design midway through? You're just not happy with something?
Yeah, that's interesting. When you get to these commercial endeavors, you're really racing against the production time schedule. So like for can, like you have to have a can ready by the time his beer is ready. Now, fortunately for them, I was way ahead on contacting me, so I had more than enough time to work all of that out. But it is one of those factors. When I was in the corporate world, it was much more of a stressor, because they were just like, they were always weeks behind. They would tell me when I'm already weeks behind on things, and so it was generally a race to things. And unfortunately, in the case with these releases for Tridentine, it was they were fun to work on because we weren't sitting there racing against timeline. At least that was for me. I don't know, Trevor, it might have been harder for you guys, because I think you guys had all the difficult stuff from over here coloring pictures, but because it really is a craft. I mean, it's amazing when I hear you speak about it. Like it's one of those things, that there's some of the people in the popular culture think that like beer is just like, it's like this cheap stuff that people drink at baseball games or whatever. But no, you dig into beer, and it's, I mean, I'll choose a beer over wine or whatever any day, especially the one that's really well done. And Tridentine has always done like an amazing job on the brews that I've tasted, and really high quality. And it really is a craft, and it's impressive. But sorry, to go back to your question though, yeah, usually you are racing against that timeline of the actual, in the beverage world, you're racing against that being ready and making sure that you have a can there at the end of the process so that it has something to go into and be bottled. I didn't scrap anything on this project. I mean, there might have been, we did some reworking on a couple of the concepts, but nothing major. It was all, the concepts were clear enough, and they knew exactly what they wanted at the beginning of it, that I had a really good picture of what I was getting into at the start. And I mean, that just makes it fun, because it's really, again, just bringing that to life. I mean, there's been other projects, not Tridentine related, that that's always a part of it. Some people don't necessarily have the vision completely fleshed out, and that's part of my job on this end of things, is to help people get to that, whatever that end is. Some people don't know it until they see it. Those can be difficult, because a lot of times you're throwing, hopefully you're not just randomly throwing darts. I mean, hopefully you're trying to hone in on something that's very core to whatever they're trying to convey. But there are times where you got to scrap something in the middle. That did not happen on this development of the rebrand for Tridentine, though. It went very smoothly, I think.
Oh, that's good to hear. Trevor, you mentioned the sharing of recipes among the brewing community. Are recipes for beers something that can be patented or kept secret, or that have you heard of there being instances of brewers fighting with each other over stolen recipes? Is this something you've encountered in the because I'm assuming you operate in the brewing world to some extent, right? You probably go to, I don't know, where you have conventions or something like that, brewing, what would you call them? But you operate within that world, right? So have you heard of things like that about, beer fights, beer recipe fights? Is that something that, are there any notorious recipe hoarding companies out there, kind of like Coke is with the secret formula, or KFC with the
Can I add to that?
Sure.
I don't. So I just being in the world where I have to be conscious of copyrights and things like that. I don't think you can copyright recipes. Can you?
I don't think so. I don't. At least that I'm not aware of, Chris.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good question. A live tasting. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When?
Sorry. I got excited about that.
I'll be there.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Trevor. Yeah.
So in regards to the actual recipes, though, I'll be honest, I'm not familiar. I'm sure that there are companies that do hoard it. So I don't want to make it sound like, yes, every single brewer shares a recipe. That's probably not true. I'm sure there are companies that, try to keep it under wraps what they're doing. At the same time, so let me just say from a homebrew perspective, it's almost like universally across the board. Like everyone is awesome. Almost everyone's awesome when it comes to sharing recipes.
Okay.
In fact, for like the national competitions that they have for home, because there is a big national once a year competition that the American Homebrewers Association puts on out in Colorado, and they have tens of thousands of entries in a year. And one of the stipulations of the entries is if you win in a category, you place in a category, you have to disclose the recipe because we're printing it and we're sharing it with everyone.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's a part of it actually. Now again, not all the commercial, breweries are putting it out there, but a lot of times they will. I've seen commercial breweries that'll even do like collaborations on putting together like a homebrew recipe. Like this is kind of what our beer is like if you were to just put it in like a simple homebrew type kit, and they'll publish that. So I've seen that as well. And I will say we have published our Diacere recipe before, so that's out there. Our homebrew Diacere recipe we've put out there. So if anyone's interested and wants to brew it, it's out there and available.
Because a lot of these, these microbrewery labels, and I don't know what the real designation is, make something a microbrewery, and maybe you can answer that in a minute. But, a lot of these labels they're really obtuse, right? Like I've seen, chocolate covered key lime pie beer, and then you look at the side, what's in it? It's got lime somewhere. Don't worry about it. Yeah. And you just have to take on faith that there's nothing in there that you don't necessarily want to drink that makes it taste like chocolate covered key lime. Although more often than not, they taste like beer. But it's a very mysterious kind of process. I'm not sure how you guys kind of get away with that in the food world, right? Which usually requires full disclosure on what's in there. In fact, I just saw just before we came on, there's a company that makes it became a very big company, especially now with the explosion in popularity of things like the carnivore diet and keto. There's a company called Element, and they make hydration salt packets for electrolytes you put in your water. And supposedly the ingredients are just like salt, minerals, a little bit of flavor, but they've been discovered now adding non-disclosed ingredients, preservatives and sugars. And so there's a big hullabaloo about that. But when I look at beer cans and beer bottles, like I said, it just says, we put some stuff, it tastes, just drink it after 2 of them, you won't care what's in it anyway. Right. So how does that kind of, now that you're moving commercial, is beer production as much of the Wild West as it seems like? What are the regulations like for putting something out there with a very minimal ingredients list on the label, where you don't really see that with many other food or drink products?
Yeah, so it's not as Wild West as you might think for the beer, because there are, and I'll say this, for the first 3 beers that we put out commercially, they contain, there's nothing, let's just say, extra that's been added that's out of the ordinary for beer, besides from your normal water, barley, yeast, that's really it. So out of the normal ingredients. So for example, we didn't add any nuts to anything. We didn't add any lactose to anything. So I have seen, and it's pretty common, where if there's something that people can be or might be allergic to, right, that the breweries are putting that onto the can. But if there's some type of additive in there, even if there's an additive, like let's just say that there's a cherry beer or something like that, they may say artificial flavors added, or cherry extract added. So typically I will see if there is an additive that's added, that they'll say what it is. And certainly I've seen it when it's been something that people could be allergic to. Now in regards to the cans, though, the cans, and Chris can speak to this. We had to go through a process. Well, every brewery has to go through a process to get the cans approved by, of course, the government. We love, all the layers of government involved in every single step of the way. But basically, the federal government has a can approval process. So you have to submit your designs to the federal government, and then they make sure, it's got all the warnings on it. It's got the right, all the checks on there that it needs, the alcohol content, how many ounces it has in there, who brewed it, where was it brewed. So there's like a whole checklist of things that you have to put on the beer can, send it to the government. The government has like 10 days or something to approve it or reject it, and then they send it back to you, and only then can you actually use the can.
Okay, but they don't get into that. I was afraid you were saying they may regulate the artwork, because clearly they don't do that. Because I have seen some wild stuff on stuff I didn't want to see necessarily, just in the aisle in the grocery store. Wild stuff.
Yeah, there are some regulations on that. I don't know them off the top of my head, but there are some things you can't depict with alcoholic beverages, if I remember right. I dug into a lot of this when we got started on the project, but I don't remember. But they are definitely, to your point though, the exclusions are very minimal. They're more likely to get you over like not using the right font size for your net weight on the can or something like that. Or putting a like we had to move the decimal point for the alcohol percentage, and add the point, whatever. They're more likely to get you for stuff like that probably. Or what I've seen actually in the beer world, and I only know this because it was one of my favorite brews back in the day, was there was an IPA called like Hop Notch or something, and they had these cans out forever because I remember drinking it a lot. And then one day I go to the store and it's like Hop Nosh. They're like completely same can, like they said same can, but they just changed the name. And I'm guessing that was probably a copyright strike or something. So you're probably more likely to run into trouble from going back to your point over recipes. The marketing thing for these types of things is huge. So for a lot of these companies, that's probably where they're going to be more inclined to fight you over like names and that sort of thing, where they feel like they've got ground covered. That's probably where you run into a lot of risks with that sort of thing. But that's part of business in general these days. I mean,
we have a non-beer question here, if you guys don't mind, but it's interesting. It says, has Chris ever ventured into animation? Can you imagine his artwork animated? I can a little bit. Yeah, I think it'd be great. It would be majestic. It would be majestic. Chris, is this something that you have done or have thought about doing or been approached about doing in any instance?
Thank you for the question. It's a different beast. Like to do animation, it's almost like the people that do comic book art, like sequential art or something like that. It takes a whole different skill set to because I don't know how they do it these days, but like back in the days when I guess I should say I have done animation. I've actually done it for Ascension Press, for some of their Bible study programs that they use for like high school and middle schoolers. I have done a series of animations. I think I've done like 16 of them now, but they're more like GIF style animations. So you think about like repeating like 4 or 5 images that kind of just repeat. It's much more of that thing than like a typical like animated cartoon or like film or something like that. That is way more in depth, and honestly, those people, the stamina those people have for art, that kind of blows my mind. Really, I'm much more of just like telling a story through a single piece and really working on compositions and things. I'm somewhere in the world between like an illustrator and a graphic designer, so I kind of blend those two worlds together. It is something I enjoy doing for fun. I've done a few of those little animation things on my Instagram, which I'll post from time to time. But yeah, it's not a big thing that I've. It's just a different skill set, I think, than what I'm used to.
Yeah, Trevor, I want to maybe start taking a look at the new website here in a minute, if you don't mind. But before we do, I'd like to know what has changed for you personally, professionally, and in this whole process, from the decision to go commercial to seeing that actually being realized?
Yeah, I would say, man, that's a good one, Chris. I still view and approach the brewery, try to in a very similar way, in that our goals have not really changed from the time that we were doing it as just a side hobby to just now it's, a fun commercial project that we're doing. And that's really, I try to keep it as well, God, family, country, which is the three areas that we try to stick to for the brews, and try to incorporate even, two at once if we can, or maybe even three. But then also, our motto being brewing beer for the greater glory of God, and just trying to keep that in mind, to not just let, your ego get in check. Like, you hear people say, wow, this is so great. The idea is so great. You're doing a great job. Just to remind ourselves really why we're doing this. So, but for me, like from the time Chris said we went from, this is home brewing to commercial, at least from my standpoint, it's been kind of the same because I'm still running the social media. That part hasn't changed. So yeah, it's not anything groundbreaking, which I guess is good. It wasn't like a switch that was flipped. Maybe more so for my father, because now he's dealing a lot with the day-to-day operations, and he's out selling the beer and delivering it, because we're doing a lot of self-distribution right now.
Wow.
And he's the one who's doing, really he's the one who's creating all the recipes and doing a lot of the heavy lifting with the brewery. So things have changed a little bit for him, because he's doing a lot more running around now, and a lot, really leveraging a lot of his public speaking and sales skills that he has. So I know that that's changed for him, at least.
Trevor, we need to wrap his car.
We do. We talked about that because he's contemplated, hey, do we need to get a work van or work truck? And we've been telling him, like, yeah, you got to get it wrapped. That would look amazing.
That'd be great. Wrap his everyday car.
Yeah. We're gonna be on it, Chris. We're gonna be coming to you for like, hey, Chris, can you just tweak some of our designs a little bit, and we'll get it wrapped.
That'd be awesome.
That would be great. Well, guys, I want to take a look at the website now. I'm gonna hope that the screen share actually works, and then I'd like just commentary from both of you guys about the design aspects, and then I'm sure more from Trevor about the actual beers themselves. So let me go ahead and try to pull this up. We'll start with the launch page of the website, and let's see here. All right, there we go. Can you guys see that? Or no?
Not yet.
Not see it.
No? Hold on. Can you see it?
Nope.
I cannot.
No.
Maybe the audience could see it. I'm not sure.
How about now?
Oh, something's happening. There we go.
Yep.
Now you can see it. Great. Okay. Phew. So here's the landing page for Tridentine. Now the logo, unless I'm mistaken, both the this logo down at the bottom and the font here, I think, is even different from before. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're right. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
So I actually wanted to talk about that because this is important, because when Trevor came to me about the rebrand, and I almost don't even call it a rebrand. I mean, it is a rebrand, but it's more of a refresh maybe or something. But really, we tried to keep some of those inherent qualities of Tridentine since their inception, and that's one of them. That logo there, his brother drew that by hand. And I remember when we were discussing how far we wanted to push that rebrand, whether or not we would fine tune that logo at all. And you guys wanted to keep that, which I think is awesome. I think it's as a little homage to, those beginning days for you guys and what your brother did to help you really kick off the project. Because for me, stepping in on top of a graphic designer who already did an amazing job on their previous bottles and their branding, that's a little bit trepidatious, because I wanted to be considerate of the fact that he established a lot of the feel for it. So we tried to retain some of those elements that were still true to the Tridentine brand, but just give it a little bit more of a commercial presentation. So yeah, we cleaned that up a little bit and simplified it, but that's his handwork right there. So credit.
So with this, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor on the screen.
I
But,
can, yeah. Mm-hmm.
okay. So this here, is this a hand-drawn font?
Yeah.
Is this a computer? It is. And
Yeah.
you said, Trevor, that was your brother that did this one, and with a little touch up from Chris, or who
Yep.
actually put this together?
So the word Tridentine is, that's my brother Cameron.
Wow.
And drew that.
Very nice. And then, this, the smaller.
Yeah,
logo.
so I'm trying to remember. Did you guys have a medallion before? Now I'm forgetting.
They did.
We did, yep.
You did. That's right. Okay, so I did. Originally, I did a really complex one, and we decided no, and I'm glad we went this way actually for the cans. But we ended up simplifying that to this. So it's still taking. That's right. You did have the medallion. So it was taking the original medallion and then refreshing it a little bit. One of the things that I wanted to incorporate in there was just that little hint of the Catholic faith part of that brand. So that's why that cross is in there for the T, and keeping the stars that they had as part of their branding. So it's really, again, just kind of bringing some of that stuff that they already had there, introducing some of the things that help flesh out that story a little bit, and then just giving it a presentation that was ready to hit commercial shelves. So the medallion took front and center on the cans, and that's why I'm glad we actually simplified it, because it looks really sharp now that it's and really clear and legible the way it's presented.
I really like it. Let's take a look at some of these beers now. So we've been talking a lot about Chris. Look at this. Wow. Okay. So here is the landing page for the Cristeros Mexican Lager. Guys, can we talk a little bit about the design here? We've mentioned some of the elements already, but why don't we, both of you, whoever would like to have this up, why don't we just start from left to right and talk about these elements and then the logo itself, and then end on what we've talked a little bit about here on the right-hand side.
You want me to jump in on that artwork?
Sure, yeah.
First? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Okay, because I know the story was you guys had your heart in the story, but so really, again, it's just bringing that story of the Cristeros front and center, and the best way to do it is show kind of the rigor and the grit of the fighters themselves, and so that's the character there that you really get the introduction to. When you look at the can, that's what draws you in, and then of course all the elements that surround that really flesh out that history there, such as the flag. And they have the tricolor flag with Our Lady of Guadalupe on it. You see it in some of the old photos and things. And when you look at some of the those flags that are still around, they're kind of like antiqued a little bit. But that's another thing we decided to do on this, was to keep the true Mexican colors in the packaging. So the can actually has a very simplified palette, so it's really based on the Mexican colors, with a little bit of the gold thrown in there. And so another thing we did on the cans is we emphasized some of those elements. So whether it's the bullets that are in across his chest, or whether it's his belt buckle or the rosary that's attached to his belt, there are little hints of gold in there. Our Lady of Guadalupe is actually gold. So some of those elements are metallic on the can up against the flat mat, so it looks really nice in that presentation.
Maybe we should take a step back. Can you guys give for anyone that doesn't know, because I feel like we're taking a lot on. We're assuming a lot here. For anyone that might be watching this that has no idea what the Cristeros were, with that period, because they're not teaching this, in the public schools, I don't think. So it could either one or both of you give just a brief kind of rundown of what is being referenced here. What were the Cristeros? What on earth is going on here? For someone that is going in blind to this, thinks it looks cool, but has no frame of reference for what this is.
Yeah, sure. I can take a stab at that. So the Cristeros really arose. It was a revolt by the citizens against the socialist Mexican government, very anti-Catholic Mexican government, which the Mexican government, since the 19th century, there was a string of very, very much so, since really very close to separation of Mexico from Spain, since they had their independence, there was starting to eke in a lot of anti-Catholic sentiment, not necessarily among just your average day-to-day Mexicans, but just among the elite in society. And so there was a series of constitutions in the 19th century, even going into the 20th century, which restricted more and more the church's freedom, even taking away like the church's property, restricting what priests could do. And it really came to a head in the 1920s under a series of laws called Caes laws, which restricted the church. It basically took all the church's property and said that the church had, or sorry, the state, each state government had the ability to say how many priests that there could be, even zero in an entire state.
Wow.
That they couldn't wear any clerical garb, that basically there was a lot of executions of priests. Many priests and nuns had to flee Mexico if they could flee Mexico. And then finally the citizens stood up, the good faithful Catholics stood up and said, that's enough. There had been attempts at really peaceful, I guess, uprisings against the government, kind of like what you think of with like U.S. civil rights, like sit-ins and different things like that. There were boycotts even in the earlier 1920s that were successful against state governments to get them to roll back anti-Catholic laws. But it finally came to a certain point in 1926 where the government was cracking down so hard, and those type of more peaceful protests weren't working. So really, it was not centrally planned or coordinated. It was even though there were groups that were behind organizing this rebellion, but there was tens of thousands of men, boys that were involved, but even more than that, and Chris referenced it earlier, there was even the women were very much so involved. In fact, there was 50 or 60,000 women in the background that were the supply chain for the Cristeros, that were smuggling bullets and supplies in towns all across Mexico. And without them, it wouldn't have been possible, which is why we wanted to tip the hat to them as well, their organization, the women's part of it. But long story short, the Cristeros really had to come to a ceasefire agreement with the Mexican government in 1929. They didn't have really any ammunition, any support. The U.S. government was actually supporting the socialist government in Mexico against the Cristeros. And so even though the Mexican government was losing, and they would have lost if the Cristeros had been armed, appropriately and had the supplies to continue, the Cristeros laid down their weapons, and the Mexican government promised to roll back the laws, which didn't exactly happen as planned. The government went back on their word. There were a lot of reprisals by the government, executions. Yes, surprise, right? There was a second Cristero War in the 1930s, not as widespread. But after that died down, the Mexican government did largely back down off of the laws, even though they were on the books. In fact, I think they were on the books until the 1990s or the 2000s. Those same laws, anti-Catholic laws from the 1920s, even though they weren't actually like actively enforced. So the story of the Cristeros, another reason why we wanted to get it out there, is the government purposefully buries it. It seems like all sides tried to forget this, especially the government and government schools in Mexico. If they talk about the Cristeros, it's just to say that they're, crazy right-wing fanatics, yada, yada. It might be, in fact, I've heard from others who have went to school even recently in Mexico, and, there might be a paragraph in their history books about the time period just to say Cristeros were crazy religious nut jobs. And that's it, if that. But it's largely been buried intentionally, the history. So that's why we wanted to really bring this out and remember their legacy, because there was tens of thousands of them killed, and really they're just laying down their lives, putting their lives on the line for their communities, and really overall the church, their faith, our Lord, so that they could just be able to worship at the end of the day and have the church unencumbered by the government. So it's really incredible to think about that people would put their life on the line like that. I mean, when you think about even today's day, would we have enough people that would even, if a similar situation arose, would people rise up? I don't know, but certainly they didn't have a problem with standing up for for their faith, and it's really truly an inspiration, I think, for all of us to remember and keep in mind that one day we might be called to be a martyr, and just to be prepared for that.
Amazing, really. I remember reading Graham Greene's "The Power and the Glory," which is about, and that was a lot of the extent of my knowledge really about this period and what went on. Because, like I said, you don't, it's not taught. It's not, even in America, it's not readily actively taught. Even for Catholics, it's not. You have to kind of dig or be part of certain circles that are. Well, that's a question. Not to get too deep into this. We'll move on back into the design after this. But did the church take either at the time or since then, did they take a position on this, on the Cristeros themselves, on the way they waged this battle? Have there been? I know there've been some saints made, right, of martyrs. But what about those that were active, counter-revolutionaries, let's say, because it was kind of a revolution of the government, right, against God, against the church. Has the Catholic Church taken any position on the events themselves? Did they offer aid at the time from Rome? I don't know what they really could have done, I guess. Money, maybe. Do we know of anything that took place from their end while this was going on or since?
Yes. So, unsurprisingly, most of the clergy were not very helpful, including most of the bishops were not very helpful to the Cristeros and in the cause. Now, in the defense of most of the clergy and the bishops, a lot of them were thrown out of Mexico, exiled, were murdered, were intentionally repressed. So a lot of them were in hiding, but it was very, very few and far between. I guess we see that a lot in church history, right? And it's not just the clergy, but for those who stand up, they're few and far between. So the best really that the bishops of Mexico offered was they were not going to condemn the action. So they agreed with the Cristero leaders.
What about the Pope?
They would
Who
not
was Pope
publicly. Pius XI.
Pius XI. Okay.
Yeah.
Did he take a stand about this? Did he say anything about this at the time? Was he, Viva Cristore, or was he taking a more kind of political backseat? He didn't want to, because we know how that goes a lot of times too, right? They don't want to rock the boat too much politically, and I'm assuming that was a hot button political issue of the time, and he's the Pope of the whole world, right? So, did he say anything at the time of these events? Was he aware? Because people have to realize this is long before the internet and cell phones and social media. News traveled a lot slower than it does now. Was he aware of the events in Rome as they were unfolding?
Yeah, Pius XI was aware. He was very much so in favor of there, not being bloodshed if there could be, and even acquiescing to a lot of the government demands. He was leaving a lot of it up to the bishops in Mexico and the bishops' conference to come to a determination. So he was involved. He was also involved in really urging the peace settlement in 1929. Okay. In fact, I think a lot of the impetus behind it was in part because of him and what the Vatican was able to put together with the government. Whether or not that was a good thing, I mean, there was a lot of reprisals afterwards, right? So Pius XI was instrumental in many ways to putting together the ceasefire, but I'm not sure that in the end, hindsight being what it was, that was actually necessarily a good thing. But can't blame the Pope for figuring out the entire situation, half a world away to come up with the right solution. But Pius XI was involved somewhat.
Okay, so let's get back to the design. Thank you, gentlemen, for that. For anyone that just not familiar with the situation, and I myself know more about it now than I did. Let's talk about. Okay, so I'm noticing the cross here, of course. What about this font and this design for the branding here? Is this another hand done font? Is this a font that's available somewhere? How did you land on this one? It looks very fitting. I'm not sure if there's a name for it, but what can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I usually will find something that's like a pretty good base, and then kind of do my own customization of it, and that's kind of what happened here. Trevor talked about Tridentine really incorporating faith, family, and country. And the one below it is an actual font, but that one was selected intentionally to kind of tie back. So that font works great across all of those different little bullet points there. And then, so I wanted to keep one font that was pretty consistent throughout the branding that could really tie those three things together. But then for each individual brew, do something a little bit more unique that kind of captures the essence of whatever that brew was. And so, of course, in this case, we wanted it to have some of those Mexican qualities. Wanted to be a little gritty because it's again, we're telling that story about the Cristeros and the struggle of their fighting. And then, of course, working the T in there just as that little nod to that's probably about as Catholic, other than the rosary there. And, this is probably one of the more Catholic on the face of it brews that we've rebranded. But we did want to at least have that little element in there to, so people know these weren't just cowboys. Like these were people that were really fighting for some higher moral purpose here. And that just kind of points your mind back in that direction again. But yeah.
And then can we talk a little bit about how you work? So what comes first, Chris? Do you draw something out flat, for lack of a better term, like this, and then decide how you might work that to wrap it around the can? Or do you design specifically with the can in mind? Because we can see some more elements here that we don't see on the banner. That are actually on the can. Which piece kind of came first? In other words, is this something that was cut down from the original design, or is what's on the can an expansion of this?
Yeah, good question. A little bit technical. By the way, Trevor, I haven't had a chance to tell you, but I love the way you guys did that rotating can here. That's a good way to kind of showcase the whole thing. And I will say that's part of, so there's a lot I could say here. That was part of the challenge, but also the fun of this can was we had a big story to tell, minimal amount of space. And I almost wanted people to pick up the can and just just dive into the whole experience by being able to rotate the entire can and get something new at every point of that rotation. You don't see that with a lot of commercial beers. A lot of commercial beers are just, you get the branding on the front and you get a lot of the other stuff on the back. But I really wanted this to encapsulate the whole story, almost like a book on a can. And so when I went into this, I really went into it. First, I dived into what are the critical parts of this history that I really need to depict? And then it's a matter of just building that composition in a way that tells the story. And then each of those elements, I kind of had a sense. I did a quick sketch to get a sense of what that composition was going to be. And then, working digitally, you have the benefit of being able to do each of those elements on different layers so that we would have this whole presentation on the can, but then we could pull some of those elements off individually and use them for other branding opportunities. And so, we tried to make it as versatile as possible. It's, again, one of those benefits of just working digitally.
Again, not being an artist myself, but being a consumer, there's got to be a balance that you want to strike between getting everything on there that you want and not having it seem crowded. So if I knew nothing about Cristeros or Tridentine Brewing and I saw this can on the shelf, I'd say, my goodness, there's something going on here. Yeah. And even if I don't, and it's clear this is a story. And it makes you want to know more about it. And then, you hope it makes you want to drink the beer, since that's kind of the point. But it's clean and uncomplicated, but at the same time, you've got a lot in there. And how hard was it to decide, what to put in, what to leave out? Because from hearing the story of this, I'm sure you could have crammed in so many more scenes inspired by this war. But what made you choose what you did, and how do you know as an artist what to leave out? Because that's, I would imagine, almost a bigger part of it, right? Is what to not put.
Yeah, that's kind of the challenge. It's culling things down to what are those primary, what's the primary critical essence of what you're trying to convey. And with this one, probably more than the other brews that we've rebranded here, it's just a huge story, right? So there's a lot there that we could go through and pick out elements. But to your point, I tried to fill every little part of this can I could with some part of the story, and that was very intentional. I wanted to do that, and it's kind of unique in the beer world. So, but it was something that I thought was important because these are big beers with big stories behind them. And so even though there's a lot of stuff here, one of the ways that you can kind of train your eye a little bit is to put the focus on. So like if you rotate to the front, like the full figure here in the front, he's going to be full color. He's going to be big. He's going to be tied to the name. And then as you go out from there, the color starts to get minimal and toned down. That way that you really have a focus there, and then you can go outwards from there to explore the story a little bit. When it came to what to include in there, I mean, we talked through those stories, and the fighters were going to be critical, both the men and the women. So we discussed that point as we worked on it. I knew I wanted it to be, originally the Cristeros for the first bottles we did, he was on a horse. I knew I wanted a horseback Cristero in here somewhere because that's a key part of the story. They're going from town to town. They're racing away from, being tracked down by the government. And I wanted to show the intensity and the rapidness with which all these events were kind of unfolding. And so, that had to be in there, of course. And then the flag was such a rallying point, such a strong image that everybody knows tied to the Cristeros. That had to be there. And then as you go out from there, little elements in the background, such as just the scenery, that's more just to paint the picture and set it in a place and time. And, that's not as much of the key element, but it needs to be there to kind of bring the whole thing together. And same thing when you rotate the can, when you get that little snapshot of the martyrdom there of the saint, that's a key part of this. These people were being murdered by the government. And it's this is a beer I think you sit down with friends and like you can enjoy it, and then you can like talk about this history. Like just listening to Trevor tell that story, like you did a magnificent job fleshing that story out without any preparation. And I'm like fascinated listening to you. I can imagine being like around a nice fire, drinking this and just chatting about this and diving into this rich history we have as Catholics and just how unbelievable it is in a sense. And so, yeah, that's really the goal, is to make that come alive in the artwork. And I could say as someone who has had one of the Cristeros beers, it almost tastes like history too. You guys did a really good job, like pairing that rich, complex, just deep brew with this story. Like it all, like the whole thing just goes together really well, I think.
Trevor, do you think about that? Is that something that is an active part of the brewing process? This beer is telling a story, or this beer is representative of something bigger than a beer, and I got to figure out a way to incorporate that into the taste of this beer. Is that something that you can even conceive of, or are you just trying to make a good tasting beer in the style of whatever that beer is going to be, and make that as taste as good as it can?
Yeah, usually, Chris, it really is about trying our best, and I think we did it. We were able to hit it spot on with the first three that we've released, of pairing the beer well with the story, so that it's not just incidental that we went with this beer style and okay, it's got pretty artwork on it, has a story, but it's like completely divorced from the beer style itself. Mm-hmm. So, with this, for example, for the Cristeros, with the Mexican lager, this isn't your really light Mexican beer that you would put a lime wedge in or something like that. This is darker. It's much more traditional. So actually it really follows in line with a traditional Mexican lager that would have been introduced into Mexico in the 19th century. When Austrian brewers came over to Mexico in the middle of the century and brought with them Vienna lager. And so really the Mexican lager is a variation of the Vienna lager, which is a nice amber, rich beer. It actually has a bit more corn in it, actually, the Mexican lager, because that's just more native to Mexico. They had more of it. So that's what really created the variation. And so, yeah, we wanted to, do something a bit traditional, as our name implies for the brewery, and as we've been wont to do with many of our brew styles, is doing or going back to tradition. So we wanted to pair that with this. And so this would have been easily, a style that even the Cristeros would have had at the time back in the 1920s.
Interesting.
That I didn't even know that part of the story. That's amazing. So I mean, there really is so much to dig into with it.
So much. It's phenomenal.
And
Now,
I'll just say this is I'm not just saying this because we work together, branding this, but this is the best Mexican lager I've ever had. Seriously, like, it's amazing.
It is. I was really, really impressed. And don't worry, Chris, we will get you some. We will get you some. We're gonna make it happen. But yeah, it is really nice. And actually, you can see, Chris, if you scroll down a little bit further on the page. Chris Lewis did a really great job of putting this in the can. I know it's on the side. Actually, you can see it on the bottom right-hand side of the can, and which is the words clean, malty, and amber. So for each of the brews, we really wanted to, because we were trying to tell the story through the artwork and we have a little caption on each of the cans. We want to tell the story behind it, but often we don't have a lot of room to tell all about the beer style as well. So we want to just drive home to the consumer, what is this beer bringing to the table? At least with 2 of the 3 beers, it's about the beer style itself. We can talk about Quartermaster Jerry because that's more of like the experience, maybe where you have the beer. But for Cristeros, this was about what is this beer style bringing, so that it has a clean taste. It's very malty, and it has an amber color complexion to it. So we want to just convey that in a few words, so it just spark that in the consumer's mind if they just turn the can around on the shelf, that really clearly, quickly, they can get the whole gist of the beer.
Now this is available, yes?
This one is available.
Okay.
Yes.
So I know there's been some debate. Do we want to talk about the other beers that are up? Trevor.
Yeah, we can definitely.
Okay.
If Chris has time, I know it's late for Chris. I've got time. We can talk about the others. Okay. It's on our site, so I know that initially I had wanted to maybe do keep it to this, but since we on our own site have all 3 beers, we can talk about the other ones. Right.
Okay. Well, that was probably I would imagine the most kind of story intensive one. So we can move through these a little faster so you guys aren't kept all night. But okay, so this is the Quartermaster Jerry Blonde Ale. So what is the story here?
Yeah, so I'll take that because this is my grandfather. So yeah, so my grandfather, he actually, interestingly enough, so this is my paternal grandfather. My maternal grandfather was the one who helped us brew and teach my father. But my father, Jeff, this is his father, and he was an avid beer drinker, but he liked his beers really light. I'm talking about like Busch, Budweiser. I doubt that he probably would have had many of our beers, except for probably this one, because a blonde ale is pretty much the lightest beer that you can get when it comes to craft beer. Right. So it's a nice, really light, really good beer for mowing on a hot day, or if you're a person who just likes a clean, simple beer, no frills. This is it. So for anyone especially anyone who is, maybe not big on craft beers, this would be a great entry-level beer. And it's also a great beer just for, if you're cooking out, if, you're mowing the yard, it's a hot day, this is a really nice go-to brew. And Chris, I would imagine
this is a very personal, sounds like, brew for Trevor. Was he more deliberate in what elements went into this? And can you in particular talk about, either one of you, I'm interested in this here and the little quote underneath. That's an eagle, I would imagine. I mean, unless it's not. And love you more. So those 2 questions, is this something, Chris, where Trevor asked for some very specific elements, and then Trevor or Chris, can you speak to that one particular part of the can that I'm intrigued by right now?
Well, I think when we started, your previous one had an actual photograph. Is that right? If I
That's right.
remember right. Yeah.
Yep.
And so that that was already there, and of course it was focused on this homage to this person who they have a lot of reverence for in their family, and so of course we want to keep that as the central element. And so it's the pressure's on for me to do justice to his likeness and make sure that he's represented well in the can. And I think Jeff, your father showed it to his wife. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And,
yep, my
and
grandmother.
she approved, and I was like, okay, that's that was like wonderful to hear. Like she approved of the likeness and was able to recognize him, and so like that for me, that was where a lot of my intensity went, was making sure that was really done with I did justice to him. And of course, this is one of the more strongly American brews that they have, for the tying into that love of country. And so what I love about Trevor is, like, I had, of course, some ideas. I dug into a little bit of the history of Quartermaster Jerry and tried to understand, like, okay, what kind of ship was he on exactly? Trevor went all the way out for this one. So, like, he even contacted the Navy to see if we could depict, like, the name of the ship and the number of the ship he was on. And so it just, like, again, these guys are great. Like, we work really well, like, going back and forth and making sure we're covering everything. And so, yeah, that was part of the research for it. And once we kind of had our guardrails there about what we could do or not, it was just really a matter of making this, I wanted to bring some action to it because, previously it was just the photo. So I wanted to really bring some of the other elements of his service to life. And of course, the Eagles part of that, the flying stars, and, being able to do the ship. My own family, goes back, we're all military in my family. I was the first one to break that line. But I still have a huge respect for it, and it kind of reminded me of my own family. So it was a pleasure to work on this one. But yeah, Trevor can definitely explain more about the quote on there.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. So love you more was something, actually, it's more of a personal family touch. So my grandfather would always say that to my grandmother. So we wanted to put that on the can, and you could see the hearts. There's hearts in a couple places, and there's actually a lightning bolt. So he was actually born on Valentine's Day, and he was an electrician. So that's for the heart and the lightning bolt there. And funny enough, he worked almost 40 years at one of the nation's largest aluminum can producing companies. So I think, primarily produced cans for Pepsi. They're Pepsi's big distributor, but he was an electrician at a local plant that creates the aluminum cans. So yeah, fun, neat little tie-in there.
Full circle.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Very, very wonderful way to pay tribute to a great member of your family there. And then we'll move on. Now this one, come on, guys. This has got to be one of the more attention getting from people that are outside of the Catholic faith, right? Anybody's going to be drawn to this, I would think, because first of all, just the elements are very striking. The coloring is very striking. For people that don't know, this has a Latin tinge. They're just going to see the word "dies." The big skull, right? It's like that. What's that stupid water? The liquid death. That's so popular. Same kind of thing. Almost there. That there's something about that appeal. I mean, we're afraid of, but also drawn to sometimes things that remind us of our own mortality, right? It's an inherent part of our nature as created human beings. So tell us a little bit about, again, from if we can start from a kind of non-Catholic perspective, somebody that just sees this says, wow, that's a dope looking design right there. What's this all about? What would you say went into the creation of this? What's the inspiration behind this? And then Trevor, after that, if you don't mind, were you tentative at all about putting? Now we're used to seeing skulls. It's kind of goth, kind of metal, but we're not used to seeing straight up coffins on products. So were you hesitant at all about putting that on there? If you guys can just go into all that, if you remember all that.
Yeah, maybe I can start off. I'll let Chris talk a little bit about the design, but maybe I can talk about the inspiration. Why did we even come up with this? So
Yeah, please.
yeah, Dies Irae, first of all, in Latin means day of wrath. So there's a very especially for the requiem, for the mass of the dead, there's a very long tradition in the church for prayers for the dead, and in the mass of the dead, just the prayers related to the end of the world, the four last things: death, judgment, heaven, or hell. And so we were initially drawn to this because actually my father, the mass that led to his conversion actually was the Mozart Requiem Mass at St. John Cantius. It was more than 25 years ago. And Dies Irae is one of the most iconic songs that Mozart's written. I mean, which is saying something. He's got a lot, but once you hear it, like instantly, you'd know it from 1,000 different commercials, different movies, and everything else. It's very dramatic. So it's one of the more striking songs that's part of his composition for the Mass. And because it was that kind of like that Mass that led to my father's conversion, and we love every year going to the All Souls Day Mass, which is coming up. I'm excited. All Souls Day Mass in St. John Cantius, that we wanted to do a beer in honor of it and do something very dark because we're big stout fans. You know, if there was the number one beer that I drink all the time, maybe not on 100-degree day, but most other days it would be a stout, and especially an imperial stout, which just means a stout that's over 8% alcohol. So that's why we decided to go with that. And the shot of the coffin there, that's really what we started when we had our home brew. It was a shot at St. John Cantius of the coffin that they put with the candlesticks. And I know someone's going to listen to this and they're going to say, well, Trevor, it has a name. And I know it has a name, but they'll put the coffin there on All Souls Day. And it's of course it's empty, but they'll put it there right front and center as if there is a funeral. And so that was our main shot at St. John Cantius that we used on our homebrew label. So it was just something that we wanted to incorporate into this shot. So yeah, I guess with that, maybe I'll turn it over to Chris. Maybe you can give a little bit more of his insights and all the things that he was able to incorporate, because we just gave Chris an idea of what we wanted, and then Chris kind of just like ran with it and came up with what you see, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, that's a good segue, because I remember discussing the fact that the casket would need to be, like, the casket was a core element of it. And of course, that was what was on your original bottle. So that became front and center, which I thought was great. It fit the whole image very well, and it told the story a little bit, or at least kind of probed you to kind of dig into what exactly is going on here. But what's interesting is, for this one, I went and dug up the Psalms that the Day of Wrath and the whole story here comes from. And it occurred to me that, like, there were a lot of other pretty interesting elements there that I could think just help kind of, I don't know, bring not only bring the psalm alive, but just bring the whole concept together and bring the imagery more. And I have to say, like, maybe I think I intended it to be a little bit shocking. Like, that's one of the reasons why I kept the skull white. And actually, I remember when I sketched this out, I wasn't sure how Jeff. I figured Trevor might handle that. I wasn't sure what Jeff was going to think. But he loved it. So I think it really helped to lend to the other part of the verse there that's wrapped around. So the trumpets, come from that psalm about the day when the trumpets are blown, and then it says, separate me from place me among the sheep, separate me from the goats. And one of the things that I didn't recall from the previous, it's been a little while now, I don't think you had anything like that on the bottle, but I thought, okay, I want to bring something from that psalm into this, just to help, that's an element there that tells you, okay, this isn't just about death. Like, there's something else, something a little bit deeper here. What does it mean to be placed among the sheep and separated from the goats? Well, that gives you the opportunity to kind of dig into that story and start to contemplate these things. And so that was the one kind of piece I wanted to do. with this was bring that contemplative aspect of it, into the story a little bit that I didn't think was fully fleshed out before. In addition to that, some of the decisions here, of course, are very much tied into the brew being a heavier, darker brew. It's got to be darker colors. Of course, the whole theme is dark, so it all works really well together. But then also incorporating a little bit more of the gold, because when you're talking about an imperial brew, you're talking about something that's, higher. I don't know what the best term of it would be, like a higher craft involved. It's going to be a higher price point. You're going to have a higher ABV, so it's a little bit elevated. And so that's one of the differences we did with this can, was making that rim gold to kind of distinguish it from some of the other brews. Other than that, I think, you got the scales in there too. That wasn't on the previous one. Again, just going back to that whole imagery and thought about death. And so really, this is a provoking can. Like, this is one that you want to sit about. Again, you want to sit around with your friends and kind of contemplate these things and have a good brew while you discuss, the 4 last things with them. And so this one was, as the kids say, this one was my most metal. This one here, I was kind of going back in time when I used to work with metal bands and things. And it's like, but here we're doing it from a very Catholic perspective. And again, Chris, like to your point, there is so much of that out there in the culture, but I think it doesn't get portrayed the right way. And I love that Tridentine is here taking some of these elements. Like, death is something that we as Catholics have a long tradition of, having a certain sort of reverence for death and a focus on it, but not in a morbid way. It's in a way that's supposed to actually bring us back to the faith and to Christ. And so that's what I love about it is it is something will draw the culture in at large. But I think when you start to peel away the story, and hopefully the art kind of is that bridge to get you there, maybe you start to get some deep, provoking questions while you're having one of these.
Yeah, I think that would be part of the appeal that this would have, that so many of the things that products out there that use this imagery are employing, but they don't have that depth that you guys could offer.
Yeah. There's nothing there when you scratch it. Yeah.
Right. It's just something to look shocking or look cool, look goth, look metal. They'll put a skull, they'll put something like that on there, some bones, but this has actual deep meaning if people are inclined to look into it. And, if nothing else, if they think it looks cool, if they think that the phrase here, attaining peak darkness, just sounds pretty awesome, then that's probably fine also.
I love that they started that. I love they started that little quote like that. That's great.
That's a great way to start. But just like all of these, it works on the surface level, guys. From an outside, for someone who wasn't involved in any of this, that's just a consumer. It all works on the surface level. My eye would be drawn to all these if I saw them on the shelf. I'd want to know more about it. I could leave it there and enjoy the beer and say, wow, what a cool looking can. Maybe I put it on my windowsill for a week until my wife makes me throw it out. Or I could look further into this. Wow, my interest is piqued. What is this all about? Oh, there's a coffin on there. You don't usually see that. I'm used to seeing the skulls on stupid stuff like Liquid Death, but this is a coffin. There's candles. Something deeper going on here, I would be inclined to think. And so people might look more into that, might learn something. And what a great thing to get at. You don't expect that from a beer normally. I'm going to learn something. Normally I see these microbreweries, they have like a purple octopus on them or like a flying elephant. So, but this is real. This is real. So like, I don't want to contemplate a purple octopus, but this is stuff that I might want to think about. There's history on one can. There's mortality on the other can. There's Americana, heritage, right, on the other. Great stuff. So before we wrap up, I don't want to keep you guys too long. And Trevor, is there new? Because I remember the merchandise from, you were kind enough to send me when we did one of our previous interviews, some merchandise from when it was still just a hobby brand, and this awesome stuff, the tin tacker signs and all the magnets, all that stuff. Is there, if we click on the merch tab now, is there new stuff yet? Do we want to leave that tab unrevealed? Is that to come later? What is the deal with the, because I know everybody likes a little bit of merch. I mean, people will love the beers, but once they fall in love with the beers, they're going to want to represent the beers with a little bit of merch, and that gives you a little bit of money. to make more beer. So is there anything there yet, or are we holding off on that?
Yeah, so on the merch side right now, it's just our homebrews still.
Okay.
And that should be changing soon. So we're in the process of ordering merch for the new brews. So soon there should be Tintacker signs, shirts, magnets, decals, and things like that. So we will have the merch, and that will be coming soon.
Great.
So I'll be announcing that in social media, but it may still lag behind about a month or so. So hopefully we'll have it in November, some of the merch, the more updated merch. But for now, we just have our homebrew merch out on the site.
Okay. And the link to the website and the link to both of your social media accounts will be in the description of this episode. I will remember. I've been better last year. I will remember that. And Trevor's X account is just a very entertaining follow anyway, and you will also learn things along the way there. And Chris's both his X account and Instagram are fantastic for seeing all the amazing art that he has. I can actually put a link to is your Etsy your primary means of doing business for your art, Chris, still?
Yeah, and you can get there either through the direct link or even just through barituscatholic.com. That will link you there.
Okay, I'll put that up in the description. And Trevor, I would be, this is how dumb I would be. Where can people get so far just the Cristeros Mexican lager? How widely available is that? And are there plans for wider distribution? And is there a timeline for the other two beers being available?
Yeah. Okay. So you can find right now where our brews are. We have the beer finder page. So up at the upper right hand corner of our website, tridentinebrewing.com, we've got find a beer. And so from there, and you can search by beer. You can see we have one listed right now. We need to. It's actually more than one. We're updating the website right now, and actually, it's rapidly expanding. So, as I had mentioned before, we're self-distributing. The concept is very novel, and so we're doing the groundwork ourselves to get the beer out there. And making establishing the relationships with the different retailers and restaurants. So we are going to have a lot more out there, especially starting in Wisconsin. So long story short, we are distributing in Wisconsin, and we're going to be distributing in Illinois in the November, December timeframe right now. So just some licensing things that we're working out for Illinois, and we'll be down here. So we live in Illinois, and it's not in Illinois, which is very odd. But right now it's available. It's going to be available around Milwaukee and Madison. It should also be available really close to Green Bay as well here in the not too distant future. So yeah, this is definitely, I would say, for those who are interested, especially if you live in the Midwest, to just keep an eye out on this, because it's going to be, we're going to add a lot here in the next week or two. We're going to see a lot of updates on here. And especially by the time that like November, December rolls around, we're going to have a lot more as we get around Chicagoland area. So what I can say as well, Chris, is you were asking about the other two. So obviously we've been talking about Cristeros. That is available. It exists. Quartermaster Jerry and Diaz Irae, they are actually Quartermaster Jerry, the first batch has been brewed. It's fermenting right now. We're going to be canning that here, I think, at the end of October or early November. And then Diaz Irae is going to be brewed at early November. So, or at the very end of October. I think I might be getting my dates mixed up here. So long story short, by the end of November, all three of the brews will be available and in stores. And so individuals can find out where they're at, because we have them broken down by category, because some restaurants that we go into, they want one or the other. We're trying to get Cristeros into a lot of Mexican restaurants. They may not, for example, carry Diaz Irae. So we tried to break it out so that individuals can find out where each individual can is at.
Well, you got to go to the goth clubs with the Diaz Irae.
That's right. And beyond that, I should say we're trying to see, is this going to be a commercial success? Is this a fun hobby that we do, and we'll see how it goes. Hopefully it'll be more than that. Lord willing, it'll be a success. And if it is a success and it can grow, then we'd love to get it into, additional states or, expand more into the existing 2 states that we're in, but certainly would love to expand, especially, of course, in the Midwest. We'd love to get to other states. We'd love to get down to Texas, Chris.
Well, yeah.
I think that we'd have a big market there, especially for Cristeros.
Of course.
So,
absolutely you would.
Yeah.
And you find you get all the way out to the East Coast in New York, all those goth kids are going to be gobbling up that DZRA for sure. No question. They see a skull, they just go crazy. They're standing outside of the Hot Topic just thirsty. And so they're ready for it. But gentlemen, thank you so much. I found all this very fascinating. I really wanted to have you guys on to talk about this. The timing was fortuitous, being the commercial launch is here. I love what you guys are doing. I'm fascinated on the art side with what Chris does. I'm fascinated on the brewing side and the marketing side with what Trevor does. I wish you guys all the success in the world. We'll be keeping up with the story. We'll have you back at some point, of course. And we'll talk about when the other beers are released, when the merch is released, because I like the merch. And we'll see how it all goes. Thank you guys so much again. God bless. And we'll be keeping an eye on everything. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate us having us on.
Of course. And thank you, everyone, for watching this week's episode of Good Night, Everybody. Next week on the show, I have a very unique artist, illustrator, comic creator, George Totkus, which I think is going to be an interesting interview. We're going to get into the very unique and interesting things that he does in his unique art style. And we'll see where that interview goes. Until then, good night, everybody.